Hi, everybody. Welcome to your favorite show, Friday Drinks. It's a very special show today. I am hosting it, and it's promising to be a very interesting show. And also, another interesting thing is I've got surprise guests on set, so do not expect to see Tinashe or Rufaro. It's just me, and I think more exciting friends that I have, and I think it's going to be a very engaging discussion. So yes, I'm not missing Rufaro or Tinashe, and I'm not gonna say where exactly they are, and I'm in good company. So let me introduce my guests for today's show, and it's a fantastic Friday afternoon here in Harare, where the weather is getting warm, and I think it's good because the winter was quite chilly. So let me start by introducing our very first guest. And Chris, welcome to the show.
Pleasure is mine. This is my second time. So
Exactly, man.
It's getting to become home easily.
Exactly.
But it's always a pleasure being here. Thank you, Ranga.
And on my left, I've got Marvin. Welcome to the show.
It's always a pleasure to be here. Thank you so much.
And you're not a first-time guest in these studios. We may be first for Friday Drinks.
That's right.
Yeah, but we've done some other show together. So, gentlemen, this is our show.
Thank you.
And let's try and make it very, very exciting. And maybe before we get started, as per tradition, we will look at the drinks and see what people are drinking. So, Marvin, you've got the honor, you're the youngest here. You just want to change the hierarchy a little bit and say, young man, what are you drinking?
Well, it being a Friday,
Okay.
I'm traveling tomorrow. I'm
Okay.
going to be on the highway.
Okay,
So I said, look, I'll have maybe the best of two worlds.
okay.
Not too much alcohol, but nothing at all.
Okay.
So please, ladies out there, I'm not one of you. I'm not gay, but I'm taking just a cider.
Okay.
Yeah.
No, that's fine. I'll not make any comment about alcohol. I know very little about that. And Chris and I, we are drinking coffee.
We are teetotalers.
Yes.
No beer.
So here is the Spring Valley coffee, and very interesting because it's from the center of Kenya.
Wow.
So Kenya is a very, very interesting.
Very interesting and
yeah,
special country.
exactly.
For most of us.
And for many of our viewers that have been following this show, they know that pretty much we don't go beyond 2 weeks before someone says something about Kenya.
Okay.
And there's this romantic idea about Kenya that some of my colleagues on Friday Drinks have. And it's not a surprise that both Rufaro and Tinashe are somewhere in East Africa.
Oh, interesting. What a
So-
coincidence.
Are they going for the tea?
No, okay,
So,
yes.
so I'll leave it to the viewers to guess which city they are visiting, but I'm sure all of you know, because one of our friends, good friends, George, is already somewhere in East Africa.
Oh, interesting.
So even our show is probably suffering from brain drain.
No, it could be a gain. we could be getting some knowledge, maybe from the experience rather. From
Exactly.
what we witnessed before.
And look, Zim is never short of talent.
Indeed.
So when these guys are away, we have actually upgraded things a little bit.
True.
And I promise this is actually a better lineup than the one that we usually have.
Oh, absolutely. I don't think anyone would doubt this lineup. But thank you so much. Thank you.
Okay, thanks so much. Anyway, Tinashe, Rufaro in East Africa, we miss you guys. Please say hi to George and all our good friends in East Africa. And as you can see, we are enjoying their products. So is the coffee here. We had actually an option of drinking this coffee or some Kerisho, which was brought us by one of our viewers. So, gentlemen, we have got very interesting discussions to undertake today. So I'll start off with you, Chris. So you are the CEO of Zimbabwe National Chamber of Commerce.
Yes.
And what does it do and who are its members? And when I see the commerce there, do we still have commerce in this country besides the retailers, maybe and few other businesses?
Oh, thank you, Ranga. It's quite an opportune moment, obviously, to try to debunk the myth around the Chamber of Commerce. Let me start by saying Chamber of Commerce being the oldest business member organization in the country with a history which dates back to 1894.
Wow,
if you're getting me correct, I'm saying 1894.
Okay.
Yes, so it's a movement which started from 1894 and to date from around 1983, January 19, that's when it was christened Zimbabwe National Chamber of Commerce.
Okay.
And what's more significant possibly for our viewers is to appreciate that when we talk of Chamber of Commerce, it's not necessarily just commerce. It's the whole private sector industry.
Okay.
Be it banking, retail, manufacturing, agriculture.
Okay.
So our bias is so transcendent, it goes beyond just sector-specific bias, can I say. So a Chamber of Commerce represents every business in the country. And our membership, interestingly, even includes some regulators in the country who seem to be overseeing a lot of regulatory issues.
Okay.
But because of our agenda, they certainly became part of us, which is quite a major highlight, I suppose you would want to know about how the Chamber of Commerce is structured.
Okay, so, but some of those businesses that you've highlighted, Chris, they seem to belong to different BMOs. So how do you guys as the Chamber interact with the other BMOs?
Oh, interesting. Obviously, there is a very cordial relationship between the Chamber of Commerce and other BMOs. But what's more important maybe for you, let me just give you an interesting statistic. To say in Zimbabwe, as I'm talking to you right now, we are talking of an average of about 150 different business membership organizations. What would then maybe make some of the organizations come out is their agenda or their capacity to deliver. But because of free market, which we embrace also as Chamber of Commerce, we believe there are so many BMOs and more BMOs will come. But because of the rich history we have, definitely we don't look at ourselves as just but more than a BMO, can I say.
Okay.
Yes.
All right. And maybe Malvin is an analyst. So Malvin here is a fellow analyst in our local financial markets. So him and I, we do meet and do a lot together in that kind of space. And when you look at these BMOs, do you feel like they are doing the great service that you would expect from them for this great nation, or maybe there are certain gaps that you are seeing as an independent observer?
You know, us being investment analysts, I think we all look up to Warren Buffett as the greatest investment mind or who has walked and graced this planet. One statement that comes out from a lot of quotes that is shared with the world is that there's always room for improvement. So I'll highlight to say, look, they especially, I'll sing out ZNCC, not to say I'm patronizing because we share the second. we share a common name.
We just Takunda.
That's his second name. That's also my second name. So not to say I'm patronizing because of that fact, but ZNCC has obviously weathered the test of time. You know, just their duration.
Has he paid you?
Well,
I can't afford to pay.
Can ZNCC afford to do
I'm
that?
at the center, so if there's some payment, I have to do the exchange.
I guess
I take my commission, and you guys, you can pay each other.
So I'll sing out ZNCC to say, look, they've probably done more than what they could have, maybe, especially if in the context of the tough operating environment. Our economy also largely informalizing. So you'd like to think, can some of these informal operators still be plugged into such membership? You know, we're looking at maybe informal bodies. You know, I have heard about the Informal Operators Association. They would be more appealing to some of these informal traders, informal business organizations. So ZNCC, to a certain extent, if the market, if the economy has found them to be of relevance when the economy is informalizing like that, I think it speaks highly of the work that ZNCC has been putting. And also, I'll sing out other factors. You know, there's now the youth desk, there's the SMEs desk. So at some stage, it was seen as a big boys club. You know,
interesting.
You know, but
he's following actually. He knows the organization more than I do.
Okay, which is interesting. If I could just interject there. So you actually have raised a very interesting point that I want Chris here to respond to, the issue of informalization. So as the chamber, when you see that happening in the economy, do you see that as a threat, as an opportunity? And when you look at your members in different sectors that are where that informalization is rife, for example, retail, what do you guys, how do you guys see as the way out for the survival, and how are you helping them?
Thank you, Ranga. I think what's more significant maybe is to contextualize the informality within this economy. Let me take you back to say, if we are to bring numbers closer to us, it will be interesting for you to learn that in sub-Saharan Africa today, Zimbabwe is the biggest informal sector.
Okay.
For those who have traveled to Ghana, we have traveled to Nigeria, we have traveled to Sierra Leone. If you think of Zimbabwe having a bigger informal sector than those countries, then you will know that the underground economy just covered or spread its wings.
So is this something good? Is this something that we need to beat drums for and say, hey, we are big? Or is something that should depress us?
No, it's a good question. It's a good question. But it was important to have context even, to understand the kind of animal we're dealing with when we say informal sector. We have the largest informal sector in sub-Saharan Africa. Now in the world, we are ranked actually in top 5.
That's including Chile as well.
Including Chile, Bolivia, you know. Those countries actually sometimes you have to search everywhere for you to find formality. Because that's the nature of their industry. So obviously it's a cancer. But if you look at some economies like India, for example, you'll see the growth of today's India. It's a result of cottage industry. What you're considering to be informal today. It's how the Indian leadership then looked at opportunities. If you look at the amount of monies flowing in the informal sector, even in Zimbabwe today, the level of skills pronounced in the informal sector in Zimbabwe, then you can choose to say, is it an opportunity for the Zimbabwean economy or it's a cancer? But at the moment, obviously, if you were to ask, it's a threat to survival of industry. But the days of your Zimmerles, bigger butter shoe company, bigger behemoth of companies are probably gone. It had become a small-scale economy. So the choice to us, our choice is, how do we progress given that nature of an economy which had become small scale? Yes, everyone would love to have a Silicon Valley type of industry, but it's also significant for you to know that outside industry in California, the biggest employer even in the richest economy in the world, which is USA, remains the SME. And to a certain extent, informality, I think as time goes, will explain possibly what is bringing that informality. But the issue is, informality is a threat to survival of business, but it's also a major employer in this economy.
And so when you see that informality, doesn't that make you guys irrelevant? Or what's the role of a BMO in a predominantly informalized environment? And do you guys have any role to play in terms of lobbying to ensure that your members that are affected by the informality, they are protected? Look at a scenario where it's a retailer. So right on the doorstep, at the pavement of this retail outfit, there's someone who's selling exactly the same product that a retailer who is paying rent and other taxes is selling. And obviously, the vendor is selling at a much cheaper price and threatening the viability of the formal business, who is your member. What are you guys doing to try and ensure that you don't seem to be tracking the informalization, but also ensuring that your members, they remain relevant and surviving in that environment?
Interesting. I think your question is synonymous maybe to someone in a marriage where you look around this promiscuity. Then you try to ask to say, is marriage making sense given the kind of environment we are seeing here? That's how I will interpret it. But overall and obviously, let me hasten to say, look, informality is a cancer, like I said. But the issue, we are preoccupied with how do we deal with the new normal economy where informality is more pronounced. So we don't necessarily become irrelevant. What makes us relevant is to be proactive. Firstly, to appreciate what is it that is building or bringing about the informality which we are witnessing. Everyone would know that maybe for the past 15, 20 years, Zim economy tend to become almost a walking textbook of pathology. You try to open the pages. It's sick. The arteries are clogging. The legs are somehow getting slow. But how do we treat such a patient? That's when institutions like Chamber of Commerce will come out and say, look, informality, we can't afford to have it. You spoke about retail sector. Not only retail sector. In fact, I always joke to say, even policies announced the top level, like at the Apex Bank, Central Bank. you see that we can have a position even from a monetary policy to say interest rates, basically we are talking of 150%. But the biggest trader in the credit market right now doesn't recognize those interest rates. It's people who are in somehow informality, even in the money lending exercise. So informality is not necessarily limited to one institution or one sector, rather, let me say. It's a cancer which is spread even across into formal offices. To the extent that if you're selling goods outside, you under-declare, you're importing, you smuggle. Then you're a bigger player also in smuggling. You're a bigger player rather than informality. But people then end up thinking that if you go to downtown Copacabana, downtown Mzilikazi, downtown Mukoba, downtown Sakuva, that's where informality is. Informality is that attempt of you evading tax, avoiding the regulatory burden, then informality raises its ugly head. So we can't look at informality as something which is alien. We look through the window and say, wow, this is informality. It's happening just before our noses, in the offices. And we are working hard to make sure that we deal with that. Because informality is a symptom of deindustrialization. Informality, it can also be a result of lack of confidence in the policy environment, which is obtaining at that time. Informality can also be seen maybe as an issue of corruption, where it's more rewarding to be a trader and to be corrupt than to go back to the office. Let me say that.
Very interesting. And Malvin, how would you respond to that? So we are number one. We are one of the most informalized kind of economy. As an analyst, is it something that you would beat your chest about? And what does it mean for the future of the Zim economy? So if you give ourselves the next 5-10 years in this kind of trajectory, are we going to be better off or worse off?
I think for a lot of rankings out there, I can't say we should celebrate being on number one, because it would make us, maybe this will be the only sector or maybe issue that we could be ranked number one in the world. So maybe for the need to beat our chests, we can't celebrate to be ranked number one on that front. I think I'll echo a lot of maybe the sentiments which were outlined or shared by Chris. It's really the reason why we are in this state where there's a lot of informalization. It's a preferred route, but it came into being because of a number of factors. Like you say, I think in terms of the ease of doing business in the world, we are ranked number 140 at the moment. So it's not just about our locals in terms of maybe how they find it easy to actually operate outside the confines of regulatory formalities, but even the foreigners we've seen. I will not state the specific nations where they have come into our country. They prefer not to register with ZIMRA. They prefer to do their activities. We can highlight even mining, agriculture, where we've seen we used to having our gold maybe partners being just the illegal miners, but now we have foreigners being engaged in illegal mining activities. It's really because of maybe the ease of doing business. How one entity maybe gets to be able to operate their business, as long as there are a lot of hindrances maybe or obstacles for one to be able to operate the easy way. They say, look, if water is flowing, it will just find the easiest path for it to move from point A to B. So it's really, we shouldn't blame the operators within the informal economy, but we should also think about the regulators. Our ease of doing business, I think it leaves a lot of to be desired. There's a lot we have been trying to do something about it, but I think if we can really improve, and we need not to just be. I had a conversation with one ZIMRA official to say, look, the way a lot of informal operators look at maybe paying tax is as if it's punishment. But if you are going to design tax payments in such a way that, look, it becomes more of an incentive, they are bound, all these informal operators, they're bound to comply. So I think our authorities or regulators, they have to put in mechanisms where complying or formalizing would bring more benefits than just maybe ticking off maybe compliance checks and boxes. So a lot of factors, like I'll just maybe, without maybe patronizing him again, but it's a matter of making sure that it makes more sense. Like Whitey highlighted, we have a lot of informality in terms of maybe even our exchange rate. those arbitrage opportunities, they exist because of what? Is the macroeconomic policies, maybe our exchange rate framework, which is not, which doesn't encourage anyone to go and formally surrender that hard-earned US dollars at the auction rate. You know, so at the end of the day, we have a lot of informal. It's just that these guys on the Mkoba streets, you know, downtown Harare, they are more visible. But there's a lot of, but if you look at the monetary value of their informal activities, they pale into shadow as compared to the bigger deals that are happening on an informal front back in the offices.
Yeah, very, very interesting. So if I'm getting you correctly, gentlemen, what I'm hearing is the informalization is actually a response, a reaction to everything that has gone bad in the formal environment. So it's all about survival. It's all about maybe making sure that you are able to put food on the table.
Indeed.
And when you look at the level sometimes of skills and qualification of some of the people that are engaged in informal activities, they are highly qualified people who are supposed to be undertaking certain professional activities.
Yes,
but you end up just doing something to get by.
Yes.
And certainly, if that is the situation, that can be something that we can celebrate, where you've got maybe a trained engineer, for argument's sake. Maybe they have to raise some chickens just to make sure that the family, because they don't have a job to go to. And maybe let's then get a bit deeper in terms of, okay, when you look at the economy and the trajectory that we are going at, what are you expecting? What are your expectations in the next 5 years? How do you see the economy panning out? And with that in mind, how are you advising your members? Because obviously it's important that those members not only survive, but they thrive, they expand, and they also cause the founding and generation of new businesses that will be members of ZNCC. So your projection of the next 5 years, how you see it, and how you sort of advise your members to prepare themselves for whatever you are seeing.
Oh, thank you, Ranga. I think it's enjoyable also to take coffee because it's not an easy question.
No,
but look,
get on with it.
It's quite, for me, it's very tricky to look at the projections for 5 years. Only until 2017, 2018. Obviously, post the First Republic, looking at the Second Republic.
Okay.
Then also looking maybe from 2009 when we dollarized up to date. You can see that lack of movement on most fundamentals on the economic front. End of 2008, Zimbabwe de facto we ended dollarization. In fact, the Zim dollar was caught in flagrando. You know, there was no space out. Either you wanted to maintain it or not. All indicators were pointing to a currency which was no longer acceptable by any stretch of imagination. Today is 2023, almost the last quarter. We are struggling with the same US dollar. So sometimes to sit and look at 5 years and say, what are we going to achieve in 5 years? I think we even have to move out of that cocoon and ask ourselves as a nation, what is our agenda for posterity? Because the next 5 years, it had proven to me that
we will still be in the same situation.
The calendar years here, it's quite very tricky to use calendar years to try to interpret. But if you were to ask me possibly, what is it that needs to obviously change in order to have that shift in the economic trajectory, which will pronounce itself possibly in a return of a proper currency for Zimbabwe, which will somehow bring about confidence in the economy, which will bring about employment, because we're talking about informality. Like I alluded to before, informality is just but symptomatic of an industry which is in intensive care unit. It's not like...
And it's been there for the longest time.
For quite a lengthy period. And when you're in support system for that long, naturally psychologists and also the physicians will have an option. Psychologists, because they will think this person will not be normal out of this bed when you leave the bed. For physicians, obviously, you ask yourself, is this not a vegetative state which cannot be somehow resuscitated? It's like flogging a dead horse, can I call it?
So can it be resuscitated?
So resuscitated, yes. But ask me where I'm seated. Possibly one day if I'm a minister. The other day I'm a president of the country.
Yes, man. What are you telling us?
Could I be dreaming?
Yeah, no, you're allowed to dream.
You never.
Okay.
No, thank you.
Please, guys, take note.
Okay. No. Let me be clear here.
Okay.
Those maybe at home and viewing, you should know that to dream is not a crime, is it?
No, it's not.
So we'll continue dreaming, obviously.
Okay.
Yes, I think one of our major issues, which we overlook when we deliberate as a country, is the toxicity which tends to subsist within the economy. Before you mention the economic variables, today try to look at the quality of deliberations we have as a nation. That polarization itself is a major threat to anything around you can envisage. Because you're asking me about 5 years. The kind of attitude, to me, it doesn't matter which political party you belong to.
And where is it coming from? From where you're sitting when you look at it?
Obviously, it comes from a lot of things. We can actually do a thesis, a PhD thesis, which will not exhaust probably in trying to analyze what is triggering that anger within people. But what's more important, obviously, is to try to bring all these people, whether it's coming from the ruling ZANU-PF or the main opposition, CCC, are obviously deliberately looking at those two major political parties, knowing fully well that numbers naturally don't lie. Facts are stubborn. Opinions can't be stubborn. I mean, you can try to argue, but facts are there on the ground.
They're on the ground.
Facts are facts. So it's important for all political parties to sit down and agree that there is a project called Zimbabwe. And that project called Zimbabwe is bigger than our minute agendas. 40 years ago, if not 50 years ago, there was a man called Ian Smith. If we're going to have a conversation with him today and say, let's push it 50 years later, there's no way possibly we would have seen a Zimbabwe with black people, you and me, at the helm of that country. So it's us, it's upon us today as the leaders to sit and say we can't afford a nation where either your success or failure will also be defined by the political totem you belong to. I think that's the biggest elephant in the room, which people seem not to be comfortable having a conversation. But it's also not unique to Zimbabwe. Let me say that. I try to look around. Today, South Africa is also precipitating into the same mood as they are facing a plebiscite in 2024. You look, it's either, if you are not ANC, you have a definition people give you. We had seen fragmented political parties. Esma Khashule, former Secretary General of ANC, has come up with his own party act. Then obviously EFF, the very vibrant Malema running his position, DA, the official opposition, which obviously everyone thinks they will lose that status of official opposition come. Then go to Kenya, East Africa, we're talking about, where our friends are in. Today you go to Kenya, the level of polarity, which I can draw parallels to Zimbabwe. After the election, which brought in the current president, William Ruto. The other half, which is the blue, Orange Democratic Movement, led by one of the very, can I say, a professional loser in the elections of Kenya. Because for years, I think if you look at Raila Odinga, he's been running possibly for not less than 30 years now, trying to be president. You listen to the media in Kenya today, it's so polarized to the extent that if you are not Kenya Kwanza, which is the ruling party, then obviously you're ODM. And ODM are the people who are seeing Unga prices or maize prices going up, the cooking oil going up. And solutions sometimes are hard to come by because the argument is because you belong to that political party, there's no way you can fix this economy. So we need to deal with that.
So if you were to be given an opportunity and say, Chris, it's you are sitting in this room with these two guys, with whether it's ZANU-PF or Triple C, you are not going to come out without a solution for Project Zimbabwe. What are you going to just propose to both sides?
Both sides should know that they are Zimbabweans, and as Zimbabweans, the bigger project is Zimbabwe as a nation. If you look at the younger generation, when you walk in the streets and meet a 2-year-old, you meet a 5-year-old, you should know we owe them that development, that job, that education, and it will not be solved by the bickering, political-wise, firstly. Then secondly, I think a culture of controls, a lot of corporate tombstones in this country.
No, it's important that you highlighted that.
A result of controls. We love controls.
Okay, so what do you mean by controls?
Controls, let me, the market. When I say controls, I'm not even limiting myself even to exchange rate. Because what is before the mouth of most Zimbabweans is the exchange rate. Maybe it's controlled or what. But controls can be prices. which is on the inflation front, can be interpretation of inflation. The moment maybe you interpret blended inflation to say we are mixing Zim dollar inflation in the US dollar, someone will look at it as controls and say, you don't give me a good picture of what is happening. You look at import controls, the opening, how strong our borders are. When I say strong, not meaning to say they are not porous, meaning to say they are hard. The tariffs will be too high. Say for a few months ago, where delegated piece of legislation were put in place in order to deal with the shortages which we experienced in the market. So we need to respect the market forces. Any economy which resorts to not trusting markets has got only one destiny. And that destiny is economic failure. And any problem in the economy, be it on inflation or unemployment, you don't blame it on what you call market failure. But there's also government failure, isn't it? It happens.
So it's very interesting that, Chris, you are sharing those sentiments. Because if there's one accusation that is always made against BMOs and their leadership, like yourself, is maybe you guys are not giving the people in power and government the right advice. And here you are on TV actually spelling out some of the things that probably quite a number of people believe and sort of share with you. Are you, as BMOs, doing enough? Do you have this kind of honest conversations about this Zimbabwean, the Zim project, and the fact that it is our country, is for everyone, and there is need for decisions to be made that will benefit everyone? First, sitting there as ZNCC, but also maybe even through the interaction that we have with other BMO leaders, are you guys, so the accusation would be, when there's a bad policy announcement, how do you usually navigate that to make sure that maybe the politicians see that this is not right?
That's a very good question. Let me take you back to 2016. It sounds controversial, but I think it will be good for quite a lot of people. 2016, Zimbabwe, then under President the late Robert Mugabe. I remember an interaction on national television with the then Minister of Indigenization, the nephew to the late Mugabe, that's Patrick Joao. We had a tussle. It was a television program. 2016, as far as back as that. The issue was whether indigenization is good or bad for the nation. I tell you, we went to the many TV stations in the country with a deliberation like this. We differed with the then minister. It's on record. I'm sure even if he's watching at home, he will confirm what I'm talking about here. The whole debate and friction went maybe to overspill even into the media, where you would hear someone being labeled, maybe someone has sent you to have a different view on issues. So our position on economic issues, it knows no political colors. It knows no propensity to bias, naturally. We opposed indigenization in its form and shape in 2016, which then led to the opening up. I think you know, following the ushering in of the second dispensation, our position had been adopted. Where indigenization, we knew how it was scaling away capital. Then they are asking today the level of interaction we have. Yes, we meet even the president of the country, the way I'm just having a chat with you. We talk about issues. But one thing we also appreciated as businesses, we are not the only constituents in the country. Typically, we can consider ourselves capitalists. What we want is to make sure profit is happening. What we want to make sure is jobs are created. But there's also one arm of the tripartite relationship called labor.
But what is good for the capitalist should be good for labor.
It depends on where you stand. A capitalist might want to maximize profits, but for labor it might mean working too long hours. So it depends on, but mixing.
But for a country like us, which has got high unemployment and people being forced into informalization, can't one make an argument that, in fact, if you create an environment that is positive for the capitalist, in a way you're going to solve the bigger unemployment problem that we have?
The ideology of either capitalism, socialism, communism, sometimes obviously is overrated. We go to town about it, trying to define it. Different models work. You look at China today. The trade wars between Washington and Beijing, they are premised on what we are arguing about today. USA, the Washington government is convinced that liberal economics where capitalists are embraced is what is the way to go. Chinese, maybe with communism, they will tell you possibly we need to remove everyone from the mass of poverty. But don't also forget that to look at the Fortune 500 top companies, some of the biggest companies, even in DC, Washington, in California, they are Chinese companies.
So okay, sorry to interject you. I want you to redirect our question about the interaction that you have. I'll come to you, Malvin, with the policymakers, with the politicians. So when you are making this proposal and direction, in your mind, the way you see it, is it because they don't know what is good for this country? Is it because they don't care? Or is it that issue that you have highlighted about their other constituents besides the business? And do they see the link between making the economy work and maybe making life easier for them as politicians? Because when people are working, they've got income, they're well fed, they're less likely to worry about the politics.
No, it's a good question, but let me say something through my experience in the private sector. Let me tell you something which could sound quite funny but interesting. When you're a leader, you're asking whether they don't know or they don't care, but let me say this, and this is my observation, not coming from anywhere. If you're a politician who interfaces with economic policy making, make sure whatever you come up with is politically acceptable, economically viable, and socially acceptable again. But politically, before it's acceptable, it has to be correct. So politicians sometimes balance to say, is it politically correct, economically viable, socially acceptable? Sometimes it's economically viable, but it's politically incorrect. So that's then where we come in and they have differences to say, but look, why are you using an auction as a way of determining?
But generally, so their leaning, is it more on the political consideration? And given what we have experienced, the results that are there, can the case be made that I think the decisions of the past, most of them have really failed this economy? When you look at the problems that we have, the informalization,
agreed.
The unemployment rate, and also industry dying, and why are they not willing to change course?
I don't think I'll also just put a blame on them in a blanket way and say they are not willing to change course. I think to just throw a statement like that, it will be being naive on my part, knowing fully well what it involves. Then when you talk of political economics, there are times you obviously go to a minister and say, Minister, or a Miss Minister, or a doctor, or a Professor Minister, we are having a challenge with ABC. But remember what I said. If you understand that, you appreciate the dynamics of policy making in the bureaucracy. Is it politically correct? That's the first thing. So politicians, their job is to maximize votes before they maximize profit. So when I go meet a politician, I should know it very well. How do I solve that? Remember what I said firstly. Zimbabwe is so polarized to the extent that politicians are even, if they are to choose between impressing the capitalist market, or what can I call the business community, and the rural community, somewhere millions, I can tell you they will choose the rural community. It doesn't matter the repercussions it will have on me as business. So my duty now is to continue pushing the same government to say, but look, I know and I understand you need those votes, but at what cost can the votes come? Because one day you print money in order to satisfy them for the next 2 weeks while you are campaigning. But post that, is it sustainable? So we normally have those conversations, if you were to ask me, and some of the points they've been implementing, but in implementing everything in total, I don't think we have achieved it. What is quite refreshing is when I interact with my colleagues, be it in the developed world, or even some parts of Africa, you see it's the same cancer when you're dealing with governments. It's not unique to Zimbabwe. But then what is unique to Zimbabwe? It's having an economy in current state where we are still to discover our own currency, which is stable. Yes, one can argue wherever they are and say, no, but we have got a ZWL. But look, at the moment, it's a fact that ZWL has become a surrogate or a proxy currency. The only reason why I want a Zim dollar is either to satisfy a regulator or to access the hard currency.
So all the thoughts on the currency, so come there. So Marvin, so you've heard what Chris here has been talking about. So when you look at, so I also want to get your views in terms of what you think will happen in the next 5 years, and also maybe just responding to what Chris has been saying. Can Zim be fixed, and how can it be fixed? And what is the role of private sector BMOs like ZNCC in trying to influence the policy direction? And if you were to be given just a minute in a room with a politician, and you are asked to try and convince them about what you see needs to be done to fix him, what would you say?
I think I'll start off with the projection or the outlook for the economy. Coming off from where we have been and at where we are at this stage, we are likely going to be operating in with very short-term mindsets. Okay. So much because we're in a survival mode. Okay. Even if you look at maybe whether businesses, other organizations, there's so much about caring about today. Okay. So as long as a lot of institutions, even individuals, we're seeing there's a loss of confidence, especially on the monetary front, where if you ask a lot of people, can they safely deposit maybe $10,000 or $20,000 and sleep well, thinking that no, they can also withdraw that same $10,000 after 2 weeks? They can't. Okay. If there's anything, one receives a payment, they'll hurriedly withdraw. Okay. So we are always going to be constantly operating with short-term mindset, short-term plans, short-term, measures, which is why we should expect also statutory instruments to be issued every now and then. The way maybe we can be changing our clothes, every week. So we are always going to be constantly seeing a lot of short-term planning from institutions as well as short-term reactions. Okay. So the moment that state is a country is like that, it's going to be hard to be able to actually make tangible improvements, especially on the economic front. Mm-hmm. I'm not saying I'm criticizing our ministers, but if you...
No, you're allowed to criticize them.
It's right.
So you're right.
Very normal.
And that's the only way that they can change. Because remember, like what Chris was saying about the Zim project. So what's good for the economy, it's also good for them. In fact, it's actually it makes them look good.
Being criticized.
Yeah, so you're allowed to criticize.
So if anyone,
as long as you're not personalizing.
From your home issues.
So I know where to direct the blame should I be called. So it's my two brothers who encouraged me. But if you look at our economy right now in terms of the size, we are talking about less than $30 billion GDP. And we are looking at where we have been, say, for the past 10 or 20 years. And we're talking about growth rates of about, say, plus or minus 5%. I think it's pathetic. Why I say it's pathetic? We are coming off from a low base. So if we're coming off from a low base, surely the growth should be really massive. We should be talking about 2 double-digit growths if we're really going to be able to achieve Vision 2030.
So just... I don't know if it's trivial, just to support you, the economy has actually not grown, say from 2012 to where we are. It's still a GDP of 18 billion, and it was about 18 billion in 2012 thereabout. So the last 10 years, we actually stepping on
so we're not going anywhere.
You're not going anywhere.
If there's anything, we might actually be regressing.
Yes.
So I would say, for as long as we're going to be having, loss of confidence, statutory instruments, because right now, how can entities commit maybe large capital sums in terms of maybe, especially FDI? Okay. Yes, it's encouraging that we've been seeing some FDI on the mining front and other selected sectors, but we also want our locals to be able to commit their large capital into our own economy, because it's going to be, for as long as we're going to be having local investors who have less confidence in our local economy, we are going to be attracting FDI loans at very usurious rates, and that's not good for our economy at the end of the day. So for as long as there's that loss of confidence, for as long as our policymakers, our regulators are going to be issuing directives left, right, and center, without consulting and also implementing. If not, yes, we know it's hard to implement all the input that they can get maybe from the BMOs like ZNCC, CZI. It can only happen in utopian kind of world. But when you do policy consultancy, it has to be so accommodative. Yes, as he alluded to, look, political interest take maybe precedence before we can talk about the social or economic aspects. But that fine balance is needed, because as long as our policymakers, our politicians don't do that, they're constantly going to be firefighting for the next 5 years.
Very interesting. So I think we'll come back to the issue of investment that you highlighted, because I think there's a case to be made there. So now, Chris, let's talk about the currencies. You were the one that you sort of preempted my agenda here. Monocurrents, multiple currents, what do you go with and why?
Can I call it a criminal enterprise in the minds of most Zimbabweans? When you hear them debating whether it's monocurrents, or dollarization either in the form of a US dollar or the rand. I think you appreciate either use a rand or US dollar is still dollarization. It can't be randization, there's nothing like that. Currency is as good as the underlying economy. Which inspires it.
You can before you go into the lecture, I want you to answer whether you're going with monocurrency or multiple currency, and then you can explain, give us the lecture.
Actually, it's very toxic for me. If ever I attempt to throw a reckless statement and say either monocurrency or dollarization, because markets don't operate that way.
So you're invited, Chris, come to the whole cabinet. Please tell us the direction that we need to take on the current side. What should we do?
2017, September midterm monetary policy.
I like the memory, Chris.
Yes. Go through what the Central Bank of Zimbabwe has ticked as boxes to say the requirements for return of a local currency. They laid out a number of factors. You look at the whole forex reserves, the import cover, the confidence level, the trade balance to GDP. You look at the inflation numbers being single digit. This is not coming from me. It's from the Central Bank. Clear conditionalities, not quite a tranche of them, for the return of a currency. So whenever I hear an argument to say, no, let's use our own currency or let's use US dollar, then you appreciate lack of appreciation on what inspires a currency to be a currency. It's not in our choices. The reason why we are where we are today, with the US dollar becoming the dominant currency, regardless of the threat it poses, especially on the competitiveness front, it has nothing to do with our options. It has everything to do with market realities. Remember, I said market forces, let's respect them. So the moment you want to have a debate to say which currency should we choose, you're actually intervening in markets. And in intervening, you have unintended consequences. And some of them are the typical exchange rate determination model, which will send a wrong signal to the market, leading to shortage of currency, leading to lack of confidence in the Zim dollar, leading even to a US dollar wrongly priced. Because if you look at the value of US dollar today in Zimbabwe comparing to a market like Johannesburg, you see there's a world of difference between the two markets. So let's satisfy the conditions for the return of a currency before you debate whether a US dollar, because US dollar is de facto. It's not like there was a piece of legislation in November 2008 which was brought to the fore to say let's dollarize. It happened when all the winds, we were fighting this headwind until we were immersed in it. And up to that day, I think the fundamentals are still pointing to a market not yet 100% ready. So if I was Minister of Finance, before even I go out there and try to be quite very overly confident in a very maybe high volume language, I'll ask myself, fundamentals, are they in place? Confidence, level of engagement. Because right now, if you were to ask me the level of interaction between private sector and in particular the treasury regarding whether to have a currency or not, it's a cat and mouse. There's chaos in the shops. It's either you blame private sector. Private sector, currency depreciation, we also sometimes don't trust government and say maybe there's money printing. So that level of mistrust it had built a thick layer of uncertainty, which is so catatonic and disrupting to the market. So we will never go and say we want a Zim dollar or we want a US dollar. We will say we want the conditions to be in place for the return of a local currency. And if you look at the multiplier effects in achieving those conditions, to employment creation, to export generation, because the currency debate, you can't separate it right now from the trade account. Look at the performance of exports in this country. Compared with some small closed economies, also like Rwanda, even look at Kenya, export to GDP, compared to Zimbabwe. You see our numbers, we are posting impressive numbers. So Zimbabwe does not have any single challenge on forex generation. Our biggest challenge today is on the management of forex. And the biggest challenge is the mispricing of the exchange rate. As long as an exchange rate is mispriced, you experience shortage of forex, lack of confidence in the banking sector. Why would someone just go make a beeline to deposit money when you don't know whether that money will be the same US dollar or it will have a different exchange rate in a local currency? So the impact of not trusting markets, we had learned it since time immemorial. 1994, Ranga, to 1997. Zimbabwe had been known for an overvalued exchange rate where it was running around $1 US to 41, 42 Zimbabwe dollars. But you can see we're still resisting to open to markets. But I appreciate where maybe Zimbabwe is coming from, because the study was done between 1990 and 2000 among the sub-Saharan countries, about 41 countries from somewhere around Nigeria to down in South Africa. It was actually, let me just conclude by saying, it was actually picked from a start that for every treasury boss or finance minister who attempted to devalue a currency in sub-Saharan Africa between 1990 and 2000, they lost their jobs in the next 3 years after making that move. So possibly that could be an issue.
Okay. So again, you've just preempted the question I wanted to ask, but I'll still ask it. So the response usually from the politicians and people who support the monocurrency anchored by the Zim dollar or a variant of it is you cannot grow or develop an economy sustainably without your own currency. Is that correct? Is that the advice that they're getting from the likes of ZNCC?
I love that.
And related to that, when you are making a case that these conditions, because I know, you see, 2016 Governor Mangunja was actually very vocal about having those conditions in place before introducing the local currencies. What do you, from where you're sitting, what do you think actually prompted that sort of, whether I would call it haphazard or sort of a reactive introduction of the Zim dollar even before those conditions were there, against all the good judgment and also the advice that probably was coming from your organizations and even maybe central bank, because the governor was saying that? Why was there such a rush, given all that good, the views that were there and the fact that we needed to have some conditions in place?
Yeah, I think let me not lose, maybe touch with your first question, first part of your question on a country developing because it has got its own currency. I think from a patriotic stance and from a rational basis, I don't think any right-thinking citizen would want to live in a country where you don't have your own currency. It's a given. However, it's also myopic then to just sit and think development will be inspired by having your own currency. Because your own currency can also be destabilizing.
Okay. Like in this case, it is
destabilizing. So it's myopic then to look at it that way. In fact, there's one argument which I continue challenging personally, where people say, no, don't just use a US dollar, because the problem with US dollars is we become uncompetitive. Look at the numbers. Export receipts for Zimbabwe today, Ranga. Almost 75% plus is commodities. You can talk of minerals, you can talk of tobacco. And most of these, in terms of their price determination, is global prices. It's not exchange rate inspired competitiveness. I don't know if they're getting it. So the competitiveness argument, where 75% of your export basket is primary, might not hold water in the short to medium term. But going into the long run, maybe we can open our eyes and say, surely trying to produce a shirt in Zimbabwe, there are a lot of things. It's not necessarily only the currency, it's the power availability. Is the skills availability. We can have the whole day trying to look at even the quality of our education to say, are we producing that right graduate who can go and produce a baton for a shirt after high school or after university?
All right.
It's the political environment, the country risk, the perception risk. So the debate maybe is, to what extent can you somehow put a weight on currency amongst other factors which impacts on development or productivity within a chain of production in a country? Then there's a second question. Then you ask it, could I be losing what we what we're asking? I think, let me try to attempt to answer it in a smart but meaningful way. A former central bank governor, Dr. Gigi Gono, in an interview, he was asking, why were you sometimes printing money doing unusual things? And he said, I wish you know the elephant in the room. Until now, I don't know no one knows the elephant in the room. But look,
it's still there.
Yes, it's still there. That's according, and these are not my words. I mean, look, it's him. Because at one point when I met Dr. Gona, I also looked at him and said, but look, so when you were doing Bakosi and the quantitative easing, were you really trying to moderate from the American position, not knowing how the US quantitative easing is supported by production and also demand for the US dollar globally? But these are realities of USA, which you can't bring back home. But he said, Mgaga, I think, I wish you were a central bank governor. Then I said,
the elephant
and I told him, if I'm central bank governor, I'll take the job. If it means I'll lose it in doing the right thing. I think that's where my difference with Gono is. So, is it politically correct? A central bank governor then has to sit and say, but is it also economically viable and socially acceptable? But if as a leader, then you are warped and you say, this is politically correct, I'm closing the social and economic stratas, you lose it as a leader. You need then to appreciate that. So that's answering your question to say, rushing a currency could be out of desperation or expedience on the outer of rationality. And that was toxic. We saw it. Even today when we are debating the return of a Zim dollar, the message to central bank, the message to treasury also is, there is no pride in bringing a new volley of a campaign to say, let's have our own currency, without addressing the fundamentals which continue somehow haunting the industry, haunting the household. Informal sector, you spoke about unemployment. You know what makes our informal sector different from even Bolivia or Nigeria? An average dealer, when I say dealer, I mean one who trades in currency in Zimbabwe. That person used to sit in treasury in a bank and is unemployed. So what they are doing, they just move the dealing room from the office into the street. But they're still dealers. So in trying to deal with that person, you don't beat them over. Those are the realities. If someone was to ask you the nature of informality in Zimbabwe, it's so complex to the extent that there's someone who have colon going to the street
as very sophisticated individual who understand markets.
The day this informality will disappear, my life will end. So you're trying to fight such kind of a person, and we have to understand the only way you can fight that person is to convince them that look at the quality of this policy. It's not short-termistic, it's not extractive, it's not a policy just to benefit a few secluded individuals. Once we wake up from the slumber and appreciate that economic policy making is a result of an ecosystem of different players, then we are mature enough to drive the economy. So the Zim dollar, you're asking about the outlook given. To what extent are we ready? Are we going to have the same multiple currency regime come 2028? I'm not sure why people are looking at 2028, maybe because of elections, but I always try to avoid the election cycle and say, let's look at Zimbabwe beyond even the election system. But most questions which comes to me, they are talking of 2028 and I'll be like, it's because the 5-year term of this government will be done. But
yeah, maybe, or at least you're there.
Possibly.
We can quickly talk about the ZIG, the gold-backed currency.
I'm not going to talk about it because I don't understand it much. So maybe you.
I thought the idea came from the industry.
No, it was presented, but obviously I'm not at liberty to speak much into it because we are consumers of the policy.
Ah, okay.
Yes.
All right. And Malvin, your response on the currencies. Do we have a currency problem from where you're sitting as an analyst? And do you think the way we have gone about trying to deal with it is the right way? And if you were to be given 1 minute again talking to a politician, the policymakers, what would you recommend to them to deal with a currency problem if you feel we have it? Or you think, everything that's been coming from the central bank has been brilliant, especially the gold-backed Zim dollar that's coming, or the ZIG as they call it.
Thank you. I will split my response in two aspects. One, I can't say we will really have much of a currency crisis. Why I say so, I look at the fundamentals. As was alluded by Chris, that if you compare Zimbabwe as a country in terms of our exports and what, we are getting more export receipts, comparing against maybe a low economic base or low productivity, and also against lower population size. You look at Kenya, you look at Ethiopia, the export receipts that they're getting compared to the population of their population sizes, you find that our ratios are better in terms of population to export receipts. Now, so that means we're probably generating maybe say $4,000 or $5,000 per individual person per year, but yet we are having more currency crisis than a nation which is generating maybe $2,000 per individual. We should be having more to be able to spend and to take care of our needs. But it's like I alluded, our currency allocation is dysfunctional for so many reasons. Some of them actually their personal interest at play, and rent-seeking behavior, and all that. But most importantly, maybe just try to put it in a succinct manner. We do not have much of a currency crisis. More than what we have is actually a confidence crisis.
Okay.
So for as long as if we are to generate, I posit that if we are even to generate $200 billion is export receipts, Zimbabwe will still be in a mess in terms of maybe our currency. If we were to generate even 500 billion, for as long as our currency allocation, for as long as our confidence crisis is still elevated, we'll still have local currency issues, we'll still have confidence crisis, and they'll affect a lot of how, even in terms of our FCA deposits, in terms of maybe even the way we conduct ourselves as a nation, as economic stakeholders. So I think much importantly, we have talked, the moment people talk about, we classical economics versus maybe behavioral economics, our authorities, this is a message. I pray some of them are viewing this program. I think in this state that we are in as a country, they need to pay more attention to behavioral economics, which is often called neuroeconomics, more than they pay attention to the classical economics. Because it doesn't make sense when you highlight as maybe the fiscal authorities, you say, look, we have had a surplus. But at what cost, especially to social services? At what cost to private sector? Have you paid off what you owe is in terms of maybe payments to the private sector? Because the moment you're killing private sector because you want to tick off surplus figures to say, look, we have had a surplus. But what's happening is that you're not paying off your suppliers, you're not paying off your service providers. Jobs are going to be lost on the formal economic front. You're going to collect less tax revenue in terms of payee and all that the tax has. So, and the ripple effect of what the actions that they have in trying to please or to tick off the boxes on the classical economics, it's got a very dire effect on the behavioral economic side. So much what needs to actually be paid attention to or to be implemented, it emanates from having to sort of pay homage and being disciplined on the neuroeconomics or behavioral economics.
So interesting. So we are running out of time, but there are two issues that we need to just quickly look at before we close out this show. And Chris, let's talk about business failure. So we are increasingly seeing some businesses failing. Recently, there was one big retailer that had to go
wholesaler
into corporate rescue. So, and it looks like So I want to get it from you. Obviously, it should concern you as the ZNCC. What, from when you interact with your members, what are some of the reasons and maybe challenges that are really causing some of these business failures, and what are you guys doing to help your members to survive whatever challenges that they are facing?
Thank you, Ranga. I think on business failures also, I enjoy contextualizing it. To say that business which seems to have failed just maybe a few hours
it's under corporate rescue.
Under corporate rescue. It's certainly bad news. No one will look at it and say it's enormous. It's not. But maybe you are also forgetting the number of business which are growing.
Okay.
Number of business which are employing. Small businesses.
Okay.
Obviously, bigger business, when it struggles, when it tutters, it makes news.
Okay.
So
are you saying there are more businesses that are growing than failing?
Yeah, businesses are struggling, that you can't underestimate. But there are certainly more business which are coming up. Okay. What's more important, possibly, our focus right now is private sector, is to what extent can we support the new normal economy, the small scale businesses, to take that space. I will not
but do you try to understand why these ones are failing?
I'll actually go into it on why they are certainly failing. Some of the reasons which we already covered. But yes, there are businesses which are failing, but there are businesses which are coming up. But like what I'm saying, for businesses which are born and somehow doing well, if they fail those businesses, no one cares to talk about them. Because they didn't reach a threshold possibly, which everyone wants to talk about. What is interesting is Zimbabwe strongly tend to become a small-scale economy.
Okay.
But some of the business which used to be big businesses, let me be controversial and mention, it's still existing. It's big. I can't say it's not. There's Keynes, Holdings. But if you look, there's a company in Masasa called Davipel, a big competitor to Keynes. It's possibly producing more than Keynes today. But most people will not appreciate it because we are clinging to the past of what is a big business and what is that failure.
Nostalgia.
So it's the nostalgic behavior, possibly to a certain extent. But this will not make me crazy not to understand that businesses have failed and they failed to open. A walk in Southerton, Workington, Masasa, pre-2000. Who doesn't know that we used to have a proper economy then? Gweru, you go to Bristol Road, along that highway, there were more than 5,000 people were employed just along one street called Bristol Road in Gweru. So as private sector, we are very alive to realities of our state versus then. But for businesses, what could push them to fail? Obviously, the operating environment. Today, I think you know, power had been an issue. Today, we are generating around 1,800 megawatts as I'm talking to you. Tomorrow, maybe it's 1,200. There's a failure on another plant. Then you look at the currency issue itself.
Okay.
Debt financing is difficult. There's been over reliance, obviously, on equity financing. But then it depends on a number of factors. I think you know, debt capital. Go to South Africa, go to some normal markets. In Africa, not even in Europe. You have to borrow to make it in business. Ask me the biggest effect of production in Zimbabwe's business. It's unconventional. It's markets. Do you have a market or not? Okay. If you don't have a market, done and dusted. So businesses are also starting. Businesses are also growing. Okay. So we will not necessarily overlook the fact that we have 2 or 3 corporate failures. But we also have to celebrate their business which are coming up. But the biggest challenge with small-scale economy is sometimes it doesn't have that incentive to be innovative. And even when it employs, the quality of labor, not only quality of labor, but it can't survive the labor environment. Look at the amendments to the Labor Act which just came up. For business, it's a very aggressive anti-business piece of legislation. A number of provisions, you look at them, you see it's difficult for business to operate in such an environment. Okay. So if you were to ask me why business are failing, those are the reasons. Some of them.
Interesting. And for you, just a minute, maybe I know you're passionate about fundraising and investing. So when you look at the performances of businesses in Zimbabwe, so Chris is talking about there's a balance in terms of business failing, others that are coming up. When someone looks at Zim right now, do you think Zim is ripe for investing, especially offshore money coming into Zim? Are they good return prospects? And the experiences that we have had, are they positive to be able to attract investment into the country? What needs to happen?
I think I should highlight. If you look at maybe the likes of the biggest asset management companies in the world, your likes of BlackRock, Zimbabwe doesn't even appear on the radar, on the maps for these big asset management companies in terms of portfolio investments. So, as an investment destination, Zimbabwe, from the external stakeholders, it's not attractive because we're not even attractive to our local stakeholders, of our locals. So it's why we say so, because if you're doing investments, you look at your risk-adjusted returns. You know, so you look at, yes, there are really lucrative opportunities, whether in the mining sector, in the agriculture sector, because we've got a lot of deficits in terms of our production. We're importing a lot. But if you're now going to place an investment in a lot of these sectors, even in mining or what, should things go wrong, the risk is really high. So like they say, look, high risk, high return. For those who are, well, who've got the guts, Zim can really be, well, really rewarding. But the risks, they can really hit you hard. Mm-hmm. So there are a lot of risks that are in Zimbabwe, right? From maybe a macroeconomic aspect, exchange rate, policy inconsistencies, and a lot of other dynamics. When you look at it, which is why you're seeing some of the likes of Stanchart, Barclays, they moved out of the country, because from them they're looking at the risk-adjusted return to say, look, for the investment that we are placing,
if you go into a different market, we'll get a
better return.
That's true.
As compared to the risk that we're actually absorbing. We're absorbing. Mm-hmm. So in the same way, Zim has got opportunities, but the risks, they're just too much. I'll speak also now to say what we could do, maybe to be able to attract this kind of investment.
Maybe in 30 seconds.
Let's address the fundamentals. Let's address the fundamentals. Let's have consistency of maybe policies, and also we need to be more consultative, as have that build consensus, like was highlighted by Chris. Mm-hmm. This polarization. If you're going to say me, everyone's saying me. You're not going. No one is going to benefit. So we are better off teaming up as Team Zimbabwe. Then we do something better for ourselves as well as for posterity.
Gentlemen, it has been a pleasure having you on site, and I really enjoyed it.
Thank you. The pleasure is ours. We hope you enjoyed, and your viewers also enjoyed the show. Looking forward to come back possibly. Is it after 5 years since you asked about it? Try to understand.
You're a friend of the show. So thanks so much, Chris.
Pleasure is mine. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much, Malvin.
Thanks, Tanya.
So our viewers, you have it. These were the sentiments that were coming from our guests, and specifically with the closing remarks that Malvin there was talking about, especially things around investment. It's I think Chris has actually alluded to the fact that there's some things that we need to do for us to create a very viable environment that is that can attract investors offshore, but also onshore. You also want to make the onshore investor happy before you start attracting the offshore investor. And just this week, I had a very sort of depressing conversation with a player in the private equity space who was telling us about the performance of some of their investee companies, where generally the environment has actually made it very, very difficult for these businesses to thrive, and quite a lot of money was lost, and the feedback that they were getting from the foreign investor, was actually very depressing, because they see Zim as not an attractive market to invest in. And in fact, they were saying, one of the investors actually say, you know what, the proposal that you have brought for fundraising is good, to just remove Zimbabwe. And then funds will start coming onto your into your fund. And I am actually reminded of one big player who was also trying to raise money in some country. And they were saying when they got at the venue, there was actually a placard that says, so and so company, Zambia. and they say to the convener of the meeting, no, we are not from Zambia, we are actually from Zimbabwe. And you know what they said? They said, if we say Zimbabwe, no one will ever get into this room. So we actually, these policies and things that we are doing, they're actually harming us in the long term. And also on the part of the private sector, actually, beside the policy environment, I think also the private sector should shoulder some level of blame, because we're actually developing a culture of not paying back. So when you look at maybe a certain chunk of the so-called blocked funds, these are borrowings, the debt that was not paid back. You get a sense that some are actually quite comfortable just borrowing money and not paying back. And out there, Zim is actually becoming known as a rogue borrower, both at private sector and at public sector. So these are the narratives that we need to change if we want to take our country to the next stage. Everyone around us is actually progressing. Capital is actually shy. We need to create an environment that makes Zim the top in terms of there being a big recipient of money funds from the international capital markets. So thanks so much, our viewers. This is what we had for this show. All that we're trying to do is, to borrow Chris's term, is to try and advance the Zim project for the betterment of everyone. What is good for business is good for the citizens, and it's good for the politicians. So thanks so much for watching the show. I hope you enjoyed it. We want to hear your comments, so please comment on our different platforms, and let's hear what you say about everything that we discussed. Otherwise, grab a cup, have a drink,
Friday drink,
and enjoy your weekend. Bye-bye, and see you next week.
Is it a Friday drink or is it coffee?
Thank you. It's a Friday drink.
Thank you. Cheers.
Cheers.